Hello, everyone. We're going to give it just a minute to kind of let the Zoom room populate. But as always, everyone is being timely and wonderful. It's always appreciated. While we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started because we have, as usual, an action-packed program for today. But you are here for our next free C2C Care webinar from Project Perpetuity, how St. Kate's built a lasting outdoor sculpture core. We're going to be running from about 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, so we should have a pretty full schedule for today's program. I'm going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Robin Bauer-Kilgo. I am the C2C Care Coordinator. You can always reach me using that email address, c2cc@culturalheritage.org, if you have any questions about our program or anything else. This is our home on the web, connecting to collections.org. On that website, you should be able to access our past history of webinars. C2C Care has been around since 2010, so we have quite the library of past programs. So I would encourage you to look through there if you are interested in any of our subjects. We also have a link to our courses, which are slightly more in-depth look at different collection objects or collection topics of different kinds. One thing about our courses that I want to remind everyone that for the first year, you do have to register and pay for the courses. But after that first year comes up, all of our courses are on the website for free. So I would encourage you to look through that library as well. We have a calendar of upcoming programs on our website, a link to our online community. The community is there for community members to ask direct care questions of our fabulous group of monitors and experts, where you can get some really reliable information when it deals with collections care problems or issues you might be having. And lastly, we have our contact information. So if you want to do anything about our program, go to that website. You should be able to access it right there. We have 2 homes on social media where you can actually find out information about upcoming program as well. One of them is C2C Community on Facebook, and the other one is on LinkedIn. So we regularly post updates about scheduling and other information on there. So I would encourage you to go look at that as well. Wanted to do a quick reminder about kind of the status of C2C Care. This resource has had a long history of being supported by the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation, FAIC, and the IMLS, Institute of Museum and Library Services grant, alongside individual donors. The IMLS funding was terminated in April of 2025, but since then, FAIC has been most appreciative of the Samuel H. Kress Foundation and individual donors who have stepped up to help FAIC as we navigate forward. So I would encourage anyone that if you have benefited from FAIC or from C2C Care rather, to go on that QR code, because we are accepting donations to kind of help move our program forward. We are scheduling through January of 2026. So we were very lucky that we were able to get funding to go that forward. But if you've benefited and you're looking for a great outlet for donations, or you might know someone who might be interested in providing backup for funding for C2C Care, scan on that QR code and think about giving a gift today. For, as I mentioned, upcoming program, we have 2 programs coming up for August and September. August, we have one on advocating for integrated pest management coming up on August 27th. 3 speakers are lined up for that to talk a little bit about how you can advocate for IPM, integrated pest management. So I would encourage you to go register for that one if you're interested. And then on September 16th, we're doing a program on silver secrets, practical preservation for small and mid-sized collections. I know in my experience of working with collections, there are plenty of silver in your collection. So this webinar will give some really good practical advice on how to deal with it. We also soon should be announcing some programming for October. So again, keep an eye on our social media and our other outlets to make sure that you know when we are programming for our future programs for the free program once a month. A quick technical reminder on C2C Care and on the platform we are using today. We have our chat, which you can go in there and say hello, maybe say where you're from, located geographically. That's always useful for people. This time of year where it's summer up in our hemisphere, people usually like to talk about the weather, so I would encourage you to do that as well. We also have enabled the Q&A box. The Q&A box is there to ask questions. So if at any point during our program, you have a question for our speaker, I encourage you to put it in the Q&A box. That will allow us to actually be able to keep track of the questions during the program. We are going to have a Q&A period at the end of today's program. We are also recording today's program. So if you have to dip out for some reason early on, no worries. We will be posting the recording of this event pretty soon after it finishes. We have also enabled closed captioning. So if you would like that service, please hit the CC button at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be able to see our closed captioner working diligently away. So today's program, I want to introduce Jennifer Adam, who's the Visual Resources Curator, Art and Art History Department at St. Catherine University. Jennifer's going to be talking a bit about the program that she operated at St. Kate's today. It's fascinating. I know outdoor sculptures are another thing that are all over the place in our different, institutions. So she's going to talk a bit about how their group kind of dealt with it, how they're caring for it, and kind of the program they were running at St. Kate's. So Jennifer, feel free to take over, share your screen when you're ready, and I'll be back for the Q&A period at the end of today's program.
All right, is it looking good?
Looks perfect.
I see it? Okay, great. All right, well, welcome to this webinar. My name is Jennifer Adam, and I'm the Visual Resources Curator here at in the Art and Art History Department at St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. St. Catherine's is also known as St. Kate's, which is how I'll probably refer to it mostly in this talk. I've held the position since 2005, and in terms of things that I do in my job, I am as VRL Curator. I manage the fine art collection. I do database management, artwork digitization, the campus art loan program has been a big part of my job as of late, and also grant writing and project oversight. And of course, more, as you can imagine. In terms of the outdoor sculpture project, which we're also calling the OSC in this webinar, I served as its lead grant writer and project manager, and I was accompanied by Nicole Watson, who is the gallery director, the director of the Catherine G. Murphy Gallery here in the art department at St. Kate's. So I will talk more about both her and mine, our duties that we did throughout this project in the webinar. I also want to stress what I am not. I am not a conservator, so I'm not an expert in the sort of techniques and processes of sculpture care that I'm going to mention somewhat and cover in the presentation. So if you have questions or find you want to get more information or more technical information, I would really recommend that you reach out to an actual conservator, either in your area or online. I also have included information for Midwest Art Conservation Center, also known as MAC. That's the conservator that we worked with, and they're in Minneapolis. So we've put their information in the resources page of this webinar. And I can tell you that they provided me with a lot of good information for sculpture care, including they had pamphlets and that sort of thing. So definitely check them out if you're looking for more information on that. So my goals for today, I want to cover the following. I want to ask the question, what is an outdoor sculpture core and why did we want to create one? And I want to tell you more about some of the steps and resources that we employed to create the OSC. Also describe the project's end products and look at a little bit of the pitfalls and also the positives that we encountered as we went through the project, and offer some pro tips for you if you do something similar. I also finally will talk a little bit about the future OSC goals that we have. So I also want to say that if you have any questions that come up as we're going through this, please feel free to jot it down and we'll try to answer some of those at the end of the presentation. All right, so in order to provide you with some context, I wanted to say a little bit more about St. Kate's and its fine art collection, and also especially its outdoor sculptures. So St. Catherine University, which was formerly known as the College of St. Catherine, is a private Catholic liberal arts college in St. Paul, Minnesota, and it was founded in 1905. It was established as one of the first institutions of learning, higher education learning for women in the Midwest, and today it offers baccalaureate programs for women, plus graduate programs and associate programs for both women and men. The St. Kate's Fine Art Collection has been in existence for 120 years. It contains over 3,000 artworks currently, including 2D art, 3D, sculpture, textiles, pottery, and more. And women artists and Minnesota artists are strongly represented within the collection, as well as objects related to St. Kate's history. And while majority of the collection is in storage, which is pretty much true for a lot of big museums or museums and collections, around 750 works are currently out on display on campus. And of those, a very small number are outdoor works that are permanently affixed outside. So St. Kate's currently has 9 outdoor sculptures, a few of which you see here. Some of these have been in place for decades, and others were just installed a few years ago. At least 2 additional works are in storage, and I'll talk more about one of those in a little bit. Though these outdoor works do make up a small portion of the entire collection, they really do have an outsized impact given their scale, their placement, their content, and their sort of physical permanence. One work that I think really demonstrates this well, you can see here on the right, it's a bronze. It's 12 feet high by Dean Kermit Allison, and it's titled Our Family Tree. And you can see that a man, a woman, and a child are shown within the sculpture. It was donated to St. Kate's in 2017, and with the help of a crane, it was brought and installed west of the Our Lady of Victory Chapel and north of the Dewdrop Pond on the St. Kate's campus. So the work has been really popular since then, and we can kind of tell that because we'll find like muddy footprints on the base, we'll find pieces of objects that people left behind, or we'll see people just sitting out there. And I think that popularity is aided by that wide base, which is nice to sit on, but also because it has this wonderful pastoral setting. And we also have a bunch of other artworks that are kind of in the nearby vicinity, including a Peter Lupori work, a Paul Grandlin sculpture, and a statue by Lee Studios. So you could really say that we're kind of trying to build sort of a burgeoning sculpture garden in this area, and we want to continue to work on that in the future. So what is an outdoor sculpture core, and why did we want to create one? So St. Kate's had a general collections assessment, which many of you are probably familiar with this kind of thing in your field of work. It was done by Midwest Art Conservation Center, or MAC, of our collection housing and needs in 2021. So basically, this assessment involved collecting environmental data, going through all the places on campus where we either had artwork installed or where we had it in storage, and then taking readings off of that. So we had MAC look at temperature readings, relative humidity, and light levels. So this data, along with discussions and so on that we had with MAC when they were doing the assessment, was used to create a long-range conservation plan for our collection to utilize going forward. The plan included a list of short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals, and within these was the development of an outdoor sculpture maintenance program. So Nicole Watson, our gallery director, and I had already been working on meeting a lot of these shorter and midterm goals, and we worked on that for probably a couple of years. But by 2023, we felt like, yeah, we could probably take on this idea of having a sculpture maintenance program. So while we felt like it would benefit us, because while the outdoor works on campus had always been appreciated, there really had never been any organized institutional care for them. Beyond, say, public safety or facilities walking by and seeing if they saw any damage or looking for anything going on with the work. But beyond that, there was really nothing that had been devoted to it. So we decided to try to get ongoing sculpture maintenance in place by developing an outdoor sculpture core, which we also refer to as OSC. So our next step was finding support, trying to find financial support, as we knew it would be a somewhat costly project. We first contacted MAC, the conservators at MAC, that we'd worked with before, and one of them gave us a rough estimate of the cost to do a workshop on sculpture maintenance, which was actually more than we could afford out of pocket. But she also encouraged us to utilize what's called the Legacy Grant Program here in Minnesota that's run by the Minnesota Historical Society. So this program basically is a competitive process created to provide financial support for projects focusing on Minnesota history and culture. So we decided to apply for a legacy grant to support our OSC project. I then reached out to the grants office at MNHS to identify the type of legacy grant that we should go after, and they told us that. And then also I asked them if they'd ever had anybody put together a project like this for a grant for doing an outdoor sculpture care, and they said no, but they said, why don't you go ahead and go for it and see, submit some sort of application. So I then moved forward writing our grant application, assisted by Nicole, and she and I, we used a lot of our own ideas of how we thought this could maybe go, but we also did a lot of emailing back and forth with the MAC conservator and also our MNHS grants liaison. And I think that really helped when we had questions, because both of these resources were really invaluable to us in terms of sort of shaping the scope of the project, talking about the language we should use, the supplies needed, etc. So this, I would say, a pro tip I would give you is that these interactions showed me how important it is to really utilize the resources that are available to you in your project in putting together your application, especially for a project that has not necessarily been done before. It's not, in my experience, not bad at all to ask as many questions as you need to so that you can make sure you're really crafting the right type of proposal that has a chance of being funded and that it will achieve your goals. I also want to mention that, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I have these pro tips scattered throughout this webinar. They're kind of based on the experiences we had within this project, some good, some bad. I made mistakes here and there, and I want to also tell you about those so that you can maybe learn from them and not repeat them yourself. So I'm going to get a little bit into the grant application and the project specs that we developed. One thing is because the grant we were asked, the amount of money we were asking for was under $5,000. We did not have to reach out to other vendors besides MAC to get quotes, which is great because that saved us some time and work. And also, just like a lot of other grantors out there, MNHS wanted us to not only spell out how the funds would be spent in our grant application, but also how the work would be spread out over time. So Nicole and I, knowing how glacially slow it can sometimes be at educational institutions in terms of getting things done, we kind of sat down and really carefully went through all the different steps and thought about how much time each task would actually take. So the screenshot you see it right here, this is a little portion of our initial plan in the grant application or timeline. And you can see that we've got, for each step, we identified clearly the action that would be taken, the amount of time that would be devoted to it roughly, and the personnel who would be involved. And I would say we generally outlined for our timeline, most of it month by month for a majority of it, but when it came down to really critical days, like the actual sculpture care days, then we got a lot more granular. It's also worth noting that the personnel that we are listing in our project timeline included our student workers in the VRL. And at the time we started this project, there were 3 of them. So by including them in our plan, this allowed us to foster student engagement, to take advantage of student connections and knowledge and expertise that we might not have ourselves. Also give students a hands-on experience that could really benefit them post-graduation. And also it helped to spread the work around and make Nicole and I not feel so stressed because it was a lot of work. Another aspect of our proposed OSC project was to create public engagement. One way we proposed to do this was by creating an online survey. And this would be for members of the public or campus community to take, and involved a series of questions, including things like the respondents' relationship to our outdoor sculpture on campus, what sort of sculpture they might like to see in the future, their awareness of our collection or our digital collection, and so on. And by doing this, we were hoping to create kind of a dialectic of sorts between ourselves and the public that we hadn't really had in the past. So in order to let people know about the survey, we decided to develop some signs. We'd make these temporary signs, and they would include a QR code linking to the survey and encourage people to take it. And they also would contain the Legacy Grant logo so that people would know where we got our funding from. So you can see in this slide, lower left, there's kind of a mock-up of the sign that we made. And then at upper right, you can see some of the signs actually in use during the project later on. And I would say a pro tip is if you're writing a grant application for a project like this, maybe create tasks and goals in your timeline that will build towards future endeavors and also strengthen your relationship with the greater community, whatever that community may be. So in our case, that community included things like student workers, members of the campus, the public. And also, I would say really try to utilize the technology, the range of technology that's out there now in order to meet your project goals. So in our case, we use QR codes, online surveys, website links, and cell phone technology. And there's so much more, as you all know. All right, so we finally submitted our application. We're feeling really good about the whole thing. And so we were surprised to receive a rejection email in early March of 2023. And basically our application, which was pretty much predicated on having a sculpture care workshop, was denied because MNHS let us know that legacy grants can only be used for workshops that are teaching Minnesota history. So we were definitely surprised to hear about this rule surrounding workshops and had not been aware of it. We checked in with our grants officer contact at MNHS, and she wasn't aware of it either. However, the good thing was that the wording of the sort of rejection email made it sound like they were still basically pretty open to our project if we changed its focus away from being a workshop and one more aimed towards conservation, and also with a stronger emphasis on the treatment of our outdoor sculptures. And also MNHS asked that we sort of direct our project outcomes towards more concrete final products, such as a logbook containing all the work that we did. We also talked again to our grants office person at MNHS, and she gave us kind of further advice on how we could alter our focus and language of our plan a bit so that it would be more in line with the feedback that we received in our rejection, and so that we could reapply. So as part of our revised application, I also contacted MAC and I said, could we please get a new bid letter that avoided the term or the idea of a workshop, but rather listed the conservation work to be done and stated that we, the OSC, would be working alongside the MAC conservators in the process. So we resubmitted the grant and then we waited, and we got the good news, yay, that our revised application was approved in May of 2023. And once the start date of the project arrived, we immediately began carrying out some of the initial steps we needed to do for it. And one of those was purchasing supplies, as you can imagine. So we purchased them from a variety of vendors, and I wanted to include some images of them here so you could see some of them. This is not everything that we purchased, but it's a large chunk of it. And I just want to tell you a little bit more about some of the materials you're seeing here and what they're for. So included on this slide, we have bowling ball wax, which is maybe something that you weren't expecting to hear about, but that's what we used, and brushes for applying it. We had some mineral spirits in case you put too much wax on and you needed to help remove some, but I don't think we ever actually did use any of the mineral spirits. Buffing brushes and cloths. Some of the brushes I actually bought at the local shoe store because they were nice and soft and they worked out well. A home and garden sprayer, we got a couple of those, and that's essentially where you're pumping the water in the sprayer to create pressure, and then you can easily spray down a sculpture with it. And Orvis paste, you can see in the lower part of the slide here. It's essentially the soap that we used, and you mix a very small amount of it with a large amount of water in a bucket. And you can see here we also bought a couple of green buckets. So then we had all our supplies and we set them aside because we still had to wait until the fall when we were going to do sculpture care. So I would say another pro tip is try to build the cost of supplies into your initial grant application when you're putting it together. I didn't do that, and so we had to come up with that money ourselves. Luckily, we had it to be able to buy supplies, but that's one thing that I think I could have done better in the project. Other tasks that we completed in our build up to our sculpture care included, we were waiting for the fall when the students would be back. So we constructed the signs that would be placed nearby when we were going to be doing sculpture care. One pro tip I would say is I wrapped the signs in saran wrap so that they would be somewhat protected if we had some sort of weather issue. And we also bought inexpensive metal sort of stake holders or stakes from the hardware store, and those were used to hold up the signs when we wanted to stick them in the ground or stick them in the grass nearby when we were working. We also did things like build our survey using Google Forms, created a QR code that would link to the survey, and then we also notified the administration at St. Kate's and public relations about our upcoming sculpture care so that they were in the know about what we were going to be doing. We also coordinated with facilities, the use of things like water, hoses, ladders, and other logistics so that they also were aware of what we were doing and were on board with it. So yeah, the next thing we needed to do for the grant was our recruitment efforts. So I want to tell you a little bit more about that. One thing we did was we did outreach through many avenues for trying to recruit additional students. And we did email blasts, we did visits to classrooms. But I think the thing that really kind of did the trick for us was creating this post that went out on our social media on the gallery Instagram site. It was pretty effective. It basically does describe the project a little bit when you kind of click through the post, and it also provided a link to the application to be in the OSC. But it also uses a little bit of humor to get people's attention. So we used an image here of Michelangelo being cleaned by a conservator, and he's kind of asking her, "How's my hair look?" So it was kind of a little light approach to getting people's attention, getting them engaged, and it seemed to work because we got a couple more people who were willing, who applied and were willing to be in the Corps. So I was able to recruit the 3 students in the VRL, the 2 new applicants from this post, myself and Nicole Watson, so that brought us to 7. So that was great. All right, weather and scheduling. So in terms of scheduling the 2 days, we were going to do the actual sculpture care with MAC. Weather ended up being our absolute biggest problem and headache. Because we were limited to doing care when students were going to be on campus, that would be either fall or spring, but not summer. We had to try and identify work days that would really work for the majority of the Corps members, but also the weather had to cooperate. And it could not be raining and it could not be too cold, because I think it's important to stress outdoor sculpture care requires the outside temperature to be reliably above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So I spent a ton of time looking at weather channel online and looking at the predictions for everything. And as you can imagine, it was very stressful. And finally, I picked a day out. It seemed like it was going to be a good day and it was not going to rain, and got everybody set for that. And then that morning, there was enormous lightning, thunder, rain, storms, and we had to cancel. And I also ended up in the ER that night because I got so dehydrated from running around like a maniac for days trying to get ready for all this and then dealing with the weather that I just was not drinking enough water, and I fainted at this restaurant and had to go and get checked out at the ER. So that experience really taught me that, 1, take a breath when you're dealing with a project like this that has so many variables and some of them very much out of your control, and 2, drink a lot of water. So just putting that out there. All right, so the 2 days of sculpture care where the Corps could work alongside MAC finally took place in October of 2023. And one of the days was kind of near the beginning of October and the other was near the end. So our first day of work was very active. We walked around with the 2 conservators from MAC, and we visited 8 sculptures on campus. You can see here we are in front of one of them at the left image, and we're starting to take notes and that kind of thing, and photographs. We were joined by a photographer that day and a reporter from Newswire, which is part of our Office of Communications at St. Kate's. And so they were there to basically document the project, the work we were doing, and they were going to do an eventual story on us. So we were excited about that. And I also want to mention that I sort of pre-planned the route that we went through campus, because my goal was to fit in as many artworks as possible for us to look at. But since we had a kind of limited amount of time we were going to spend with the conservators, I knew we had to be strategic about how we moved through campus. We would not want to be zigzagging all over trying to hit everything. So instead, I tried to think about where were most of the sculptures located, and that was definitely on the west end of campus. So that's really where we spent the majority of our time. And I mapped the route out, and then I walked it several times to see how long it would take. And then I made a list of the works that we were actually going to try to see, and I gave that list to everybody involved. So I think that worked out pretty well. So this meant that even though we didn't get to look at all of our sculptures, we were able to visit a good number of them and to really use our time with MAC wisely. So when we were walking around, we also, like I was saying before, we learned how to monitor changes in condition for artworks, and also the ways in which prevention and treatment can differ for each type of sculpture. So you can see here the conservator is pointing out some damage to this concrete sculpture that is surrounded by wood elements as well. So we had an unexpected finding when we made our way around. We went over to see Our Lady, which you can see in the background of the image here. And that's a large bronze sculpture by Peter Lepori. And one of the conservators took a look at it, and she pointed out to us that it was leaning backwards quite a bit. And you can definitely make that out in the image here when you're looking at it. Also, around the same time, you can kind of see in the background, the university was in the process of remodeling the chapel and the surrounding area. So we notified facilities soon afterwards about what was happening with Our Lady, and the sculpture was pretty quickly removed after that and put into storage. So I think this is a good example of where the OSC project was able to be we were able to be kind of the eyes and ears on campus, or additional eyes and ears on campus to look at these artworks and see what was going on with them. And we also likely saved the university from having to deal with a situation that could have been dangerous to both the artwork and to passersby. Fortunately, going forward, the fact that the work is in storage means that if we want to try to clean it, because it's not been cleaned yet, we are going to have an easier time because it's not going to be so high off the ground. And our goal is to have it reinstalled in 5 years. All right, so then we really got down and dirty, and we started washing and cleaning a work that's called A Venus on the Road Again. It's right outside the art building. It is concrete and wood, and it's by Neda Miranda Blažević Kritzman. So these images really show some of the work that we did that day. And this included things like we first would wash off the entire sculpture. We would then, using the garden sprayers and water, and then we would mix up a little bit of that Orvis paste with water, and we would get in there with brushes and rags and start cleaning all the surfaces that we could. And once you thought it was looked pretty good, that you would then rinse everything off. And as you can see, a pro tip that I would definitely put across from looking at these images and from our experience doing this is don't wear nice clothing on a day you're going to do sculpture care, because it's extremely messy work and can be kind of dirty as well. So after we were done with the work that day, the conservators kind of pulled us aside and said, oh, you guys should probably come back and do even more work on it, because it still has a lot of grime on the wooden portions of the work. There's a lot of trees around there giving up pollen and dirt and debris and that sort of thing, and it had been collecting that for decades. So they said, could you please do a little bit more? So a couple days later, myself and other members of the Corps were able to jump back into action, and we tackled the work some more. And you can see us there doing some of that work. And we definitely worked on it for many hours that day. So it was a very laborious job, especially with work that had so many kind of nooks and crannies and was of a couple different kinds of mediums. So we weren't able to find a day and time that would work for our second day until almost the end of October, but we finally did, and we met again to do sculpture care. And on this day, the plan was to concentrate on 2 bronzes that were located outside, one of them very close to their building and the other one probably about 200 yards away. So first we gathered in the VRL, and that's actually where I'm sitting in right now. Behind me you can see some portion of it. And we went over sort of the tools and products that we were going to be using with our MAC conservators. We then moved outdoors to the first of 2 bronzes, and one of them was an untitled work featuring a pair of lions. As you can see in these photos, the work we did was sort of in steps. We did washing and cleaning, and then we dried everything off. Then we had to wait like maybe half an hour. Then you could come back and apply the wax with the brushes. Then you had to wait a little while longer. Then you had to come back in with like cotton and other types of soft brushes, and you tried to buff the heck out of everything to try to get it as nice of a sheen as possible. So you could literally buff and buff and buff all day long, and you probably could still find more to do. So we did that for a while and got the hang of that. And then once the lions were on their way, we had half of the group, half of the OSC group split off and go over to the other bronze that we wanted to clean that day. Here you can see it here. It's called St. Francis of Assisi, and it's another Lupori work. And we basically did a very similar approach to cleaning as we did to the lions. But it was also pointed out to us by the conservators that this was probably the healthiest artwork that they had seen on campus that we looked at, and that was kind of nice for us to hear. It was in good shape. So follow-up work to the project after we were done with Mac coming and being there with us. The members of the Corps really utilized their knowledge and their experience to clean another work, which you can see at lower left. It's called 0G, and it's over near the library. And that was one more bronze. So that gave us a total of 4 works, all of which you can see here, that we had completed by the end of fall 2023. And we also came back and photographed these works when we were done, not only to document what our work had been on them, but also sometimes we wanted to add something to our digital collection. And so now we get a really good looking shot of the artwork. So you can see the ones on the right, the 3 on the right side of the screen here really are the ones that have been totally cleaned up and they're looking great. And to wrap up our grant with MNHS, we had to submit a couple things, a couple documents I just want to talk about quickly. One of them was our sort of final report, and this report was very lengthy, and it covered many of the same aspects I'm talking about today, but it also provided more information about the works that were cleaned, the processes that were used, and so on. And because the report was so image heavy and our work really was so image heavy, and it also contained all of our notes from our logbook, I got clearance from MNHS to upload the whole thing in PDF form. And they said, okay, you can do that. So this is a little portion of that PDF here, and that's kind of how it ended up looking. The other thing we submitted was titled Measurable Outcomes, and that was basically a series of questions provided by MNHS, which we then had to provide answers to based on our work with the OSC, and also kind of looking at our survey that we did and results that we had from that, and kind of providing some data analysis of that of the survey data. So you can see a little image of that there on the right from that document. And we also followed up with students. We gave them each a certificate of completion with their name nicely written out, and we signed it. And it was just nice to give them something physical that they to show that they had done this work and they'd gotten involved and gotten this knowledge. And I also modified our collection database, which we use FileMaker Pro. And you can see I did a little screenshot here of part of the database. So by doing this, we could record all the work that we did that initial year with the OSC, including on the lower right. We tried to put the exact notes in that we got back from MAC when they gave us sort of their final report for the project. We also created a field, which you can see sort of at center left, that's called date work treated. And so if we did an additional care, say the following year, then we can kind of log that in there as well. And I also want to stress that if you're going to do good practice for sculpture care, this was really, MAC let us know this, that you really want to be doing that annually if possible. So outcomes. Once we kind of wrapped up that first year of work with the OSA project, it was kind of interesting to kind of look back on it and say, what went right? What went wrong? What was unexpected? So I just want to go over a little bit of that with you now. So I would say some of the things that went right, or one of the things that went right and was expected, was the Newswire article. As you recall, we had the photographer and the reporter come along from Newswire on our initial day of sculpture care. And so they did end up doing a nice write-up of that, and you can see a screenshot of that at lower left. What was unexpected was in the following spring, we got contacted by a local newspaper called My Villager, and the reporter who contacted me had heard about our project, and so she said they wanted to do a story on it as well. And they came and took photographs of us looking at the artwork and talking more about the project. And so that was really great that story was done, because it really kind of provided a window into what we were doing here at St. Kate's for the community around us. And a lot of people in that community are pretty interested. And it also kind of was a way to try to get people to maybe come onto campus and visit the sculpture themselves to see how they were looking. Another great outcome that we had from the project was student impact. I found out last semester that one of the students who was one of the initial members, who was very helpful in the project, very enthusiastic, she is applying currently to graduate school for conservation, and based somewhat on her work on this project. So that was very gratifying to hear. And what are things that we had to deal with in the project that maybe weren't so great or were unexpected in not a great way, not a totally good way? And one of them obviously was our initial grant application rejection. However, as noted earlier, that rejection did have a silver lining in that it provided feedback as to how we could maybe change our focus and possibly resubmit our application. So I think this leads me to again stress how important it is to work effectively with your grant personnel, if you have any, towards your goals for a given project. This means of course you want to be clear, polite, professional, but also be open to suggestions and maybe some changes in order to find a way around issues that arise. Our situation also shows that maybe your grant personnel are not always necessarily going to know all the rules, and that it may be a learning opportunity for them as well. And I would also note that recent shifts in political climate, especially nationally right now, sometimes it might be meaning that the rules for grants and projects and proposals out there have changed or shifted somewhat. So I would think it's accurate to state that when it comes to applying for grants or reapplying for grants, a certain level of tenacity and flexibility is definitely a good thing to have. Finally, the last thing, I would say the last thing that I found after this project that was unexpected involved our signs that we created. We found that we probably should have created even more signs than we actually did, and we should have placed them further away from where we were doing the sculpture care. Because we noticed that when we were doing the care, a lot of people actually sort of avoided us. They sort of stayed away rather than coming closer to see what we were doing. And so then they didn't see our signs and they didn't take our survey. So we didn't get that many survey results or people responding to the survey. So I think you would want to keep this in mind if you're doing a sort of similar project that kind of could happen, and maybe think of other ways you could maybe engage the community if you're trying to reach them in a certain way. So finally, I want to just touch on some of the work we've done since 2023, as well as our goals for the future. Since 2023, we've continued to do sculpture care. We've also trained in new members, and we've seen some other people graduate or kind of fade away as core members. We've also had one of our OSC members, a student, went last semester or in the fall last year to a table in the sort of student center on campus, and she brought along some metal objects that were inexpensive that were part of our teaching collection, and she brought along some of the sculpture care materials, and she had people kind of try to do a little bit of sculpture care on them, and also told them more about the the program and trying to get people to maybe join. So that was kind of a nice hands-on thing to do. And in terms of future goals that we have on our list, one thing is possibly getting our OSC member positions funded, because I think that would make it easier to recruit. Also an expansion of who could be an OSC member beyond just students. For instance, when we did our tabling event, we found that some members of facilities had walked up and said they might be interested in doing it. And finally, we'd like to obtain funds for both either purchase or rental of scaffolding, and as well as training on how to use scaffolding, because some of our works are too large, too tall for us to actually work on safely currently. So those are all things we're looking for in the future. So I hope you have gained some good information from this webinar, and that at least some of the tips I've offered in it are helpful to you if you do something similar. I would reiterate that weather is definitely going to be your biggest issue probably, or challenge in a project such as this, because it is located outside. So consider the weather or climate in your area and when the work can best get done, and see if you can plan around that. In our case, Minnesota definitely has 4 seasons, and I would say probably about half the year sculpture care is not going to be workable because it's either going to be too cold and or too wet to do it. However, if you live in a drier, warmer climate, you may not run into that issue much at all. But of course, we've also seen lately, it seems like a lot of parts of both the country and the world are experiencing very high levels of extended heat, unnaturally warm weather. And so I'm sure that also could have an impact on sculpture care as well, and make it kind of tough to be outside. But anyhow, I hope you agree with me that the Outdoor Sculpture Corps was a worthy and effective project to get up and running. And I would definitely recommend that other collections do something similar. And I thank you for your time. And if you have any additional questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was great. Yeah, it was. I have questions of my own, but people are already coming in with questions, so we'll try to hit those first. If you don't mind stopping the share on your screen real quick.
Sure.
And I'll also add that before we start the questions, I dropped links in the chat to our page where we've added a copy of this presentation and some resources that Jennifer had put together so you guys can access, and also a survey to our program. We take those survey results very seriously. Let's talk about surveys in this one, but we all live and die by surveys. So I hope you guys will take a few minutes to take the survey just to let us know how you're thinking the program's going. So the first couple questions that popped in all kind of deal with, I guess, older volunteers. So I'm going to hit those first. How would you translate the enthusiasm your students show to older adults? So like, could you think when you're kind of considering this program, how this could transfer to an older volunteer corps? Because I know a lot of folks, that's what we deal with, right? When it deals with volunteers. So we wanted to get your thoughts on that first.
And I think when we started the program, because our population we kind of are generally dealing with and sort of focused on is our student population, and they do tend to skew younger, like you said, but that's not always necessarily true. But I would think that, you know, you would have to be, if like we've talked about expanding our sort of membership of the Corps to maybe even members of facilities, members of the staff, maybe even the public or neighbors who are interested. I think if you were going to do that, it would be very workable, but you would have to be cognizant of the weather outside and think, am I putting people under too much a stressful situation? You know, you'd want to be talking to and doing some training ahead of time to say, we're going to be out here and it's going to be this kind of weather today, and we're going to have water available and we'll have some snacks. And, you know, you could really kind of have to see where people were at and try to work with that. And so that you could provide a safe setting, but also that you would get a lot of people, I think, would be very engaged in the project. And I think that some of the students were like ultra active that we had, and some of them were a little more laid back and did some work. So it wasn't like they were all out there just completely, you know, exhausted by the end of the day. I think I was the one who was probably the most exhausted because I was trying to like manage everything and like I said, worrying about the weather and all these component parts. So I definitely could have taken a little more of a chill myself, you know, like that's what I learned from the project. But I think it would be definitely manageable, but you would just, you know, you would try to go into it with your eyes open and make sure that people are aware of maybe the types of work they maybe would be doing, and they could give you a preference.
Yeah, I think that dealing with that mixed volunteer core, it is kind of looking at what are everyone's strengths and weaknesses, you know what I mean? And kind of figuring out like if you have people and like I've helped with outdoor sculpture stuff once or twice. And I also, you know, a lot of the points you were bringing up about looking at physical and even like mental health a little bit is a lot of what we do with emergency response too, right? Because you're working so much with adrenaline and so much trying to deal with that, that kind of taking a step back and being like, am I hydrating enough is very
Exactly. Yeah.
important while
Yeah.
you're dealing with that. So thanks for bringing those points up.
Mhm.
The other part of this question, which I like too, is what do the students seem to enjoy the most? So what do they like doing the most while dealing with sculpture care?
I would say, I mean, I look back, we took a ton of photos from the project, as you can imagine, and I had to look at those photos a lot throughout for the grant and so on, and putting together my reports. And also I was there, you know, seeing what people were doing and helping myself. But I would say probably the thing that sticks with me the most, where I saw people laughing the most and enjoying themselves, was when we were doing the actual care. Both applying the wax, say when we were outside doing the bronzes, when we were applying the wax, and then when we were buffing it all off. And it was kind of fun when people sort of enclose the sculpture from all sides, kind of come at it. People were, you know, going into the eardrums of the lions and trying to, there was a spider in there and they were trying to chase it out and they were laughing about that. And, you know, so you kind of find all this kind of odd stuff as you're doing it that people sort of bond around. And so it seemed like people were having a good time and kind of getting to know each other better, laughing and talking. It didn't feel ultra serious, you know, even though people were trying to do a good job with their work. I think also when you're spraying down that larger Venus sculpture, that's kind of a fun, messy activity to do as well, but it is definitely messy and you can end up being sprayed yourself. And you know, you also have to be careful. You can't be like running up a ladder and slipping off or something like that. So I tended to be the one who was going up on the ladder, but yeah, you know, there's kind of a range of activities, but I think sculpture care was definitely the actual physical getting in there doing it was what people liked, and they liked seeing the end product too and seeing how great these looked after we were done with them.
Yeah, I mean, the instant gratification from seeing objects actually getting cleaned up and like the improvement you see is it's nice. You know what I mean? Like that, I know. I'm now, I think like a lot of us are trapped in the world of spreadsheets and administrative work most days. So when I actually get to go out and do collection stuff, I'm always like, oh, this is lovely. You know what I mean? Like having that break, getting the physical on. So I can definitely appreciate that.
Mhm.
Someone's asking, how have you continued the momentum for sculpture care since the project started? So you talked a little bit about after effects, but like, what are you guys doing right now to continue the sculpture care across campus?
I mean, like we said, we had the tabling event, trying to get some new members. We did not have anybody who applied out of that, but like we said, we did make these connections with facilities, and so we're getting some more other ideas there about what we could do. We are kind of lucky; we have sort of a built-in sort of funnel of people coming through because I hire students every year who are in the Visual Resources Library, and so I have at least 2 student workers for that this coming year. So I kind of know that they're going to be part of that program. And so if we can get more students to be involved, that's great. But we kind of have at least some built-in ones that we can train, and then they can continue to do the core work for the coming year. And so that's our plan, is that they will help when we decide to tackle, maybe we go back to Venus and clean her again, or, you know, there's other works on campus that we could start trying to work with. So myself and Nicole, we are the core members who for sure will always be here. We're not graduating. We stay on, so we continue to help train and then kind of keep that ball rolling down the road. And then as far as like our goals for maybe getting funding for this and that, that's going to be a lot more, as you can imagine, political and institutional, like maneuvering to see what we can maybe apply for, where we could get this funding. That's a lot more unknown until you kind of start digging into the individual goal to see, could we possibly achieve this, or is there some sort of grant funding we could get, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we are just definitely looking at it as being kind of a circular thing that continues on. And we also had one of my students put together a kind of book showing all the steps we did and all the kind of rules and advice and um, kind of norms that we were given by MAC. We wrote that all up with lots of images so that we would not lose that knowledge. So that's another way to kind of keep that solidified and not just have it kind of fritter away in the wind and people forget how to do it.
That's great to hear. I know that sometimes it is hard when you're in the midst of it. You'll get caught up in like the process and not thinking about the record keeping portion of it. And I think it's great that you guys kept all that because, you know, even though you and Nicole are like the stalwarts and you'll always be there, you just never know, right? So it's always nice to know that there is this record happening. So that's wonderful. Someone had asked, is there any, and this is kind of more of a general question, when it comes to cleanup, so like after you're done, you know, with the portion of working with the, or even in the process, were you paying attention to kind of the materials that were being cleaned off as they were going in? Was there any kind of environmental concern when it came to the runoff from the cleaning, or kind of how you work with facilities on it? Or was there any thought to that? Because that's something I would not think of, but someone brought it up as a question. I think it's a good
Well, I do remember that someone asked about, like, say, the Orvis soap, whether or not we should worry, but could we just dump that out on the ground when we were done? And they said it was, you know, I believe they said it was like biodegradable and it was okay, so we could dump that and not worry about it. Beyond that, we didn't really have any great sort of runoff. We were mostly cleaning, like on that Venus work, it had a lot of pollen and dirt and snow that had been there in the winters, everything piling up all over it. And a lot of areas where there wasn't good runoff, so there was almost like, you know, just kind of areas of biological growth that you wanted to get off. So I felt like the materials we were pretty much working with are pretty more in the natural realm. But I wouldn't want to say too much more because I'm not a conservator, but it seemed to go pretty smoothly. And then once we had everything done, we gave facilities back their ladders and so on, and then we took all the buckets and the sprayers and the soap and the brushes and put them all in a safe place in the VRL so that they're all kind of together and we can pick them up again for the next time.
Perfect. Yeah, we have in the chat, it is in California, it's not allowed to let runoff go into storm drains, is not allowed. And yeah, I think that's maybe something that you do as your homework before you start one of these projects, is being like, okay, if we do have runoff, is it allowed? Because I know I've lived in, when I previously lived in the Florida Keys, we would have that same problem, right? Because everything went out into the water and they were very environmentally conscious down in the Florida Keys, but now in other areas, they might not worry about that. So maybe that's some homework to look at while you're looking at that. So that's a good point. So we have one other question, which I think is interesting. Do you have any advice on working with the media to communicate the importance of collections care projects? So when you were doing with the Newswire and all that, was there anything you were really focused on communicating, or what's your advice when you're talking to those kind of folks?
I mean, I guess I would say just stressing that if you're not caring for the artwork, it's going to eventually kind of go away, or it's going to get so degraded that you're going to have, you know, you're going to have to remove the work and have it treated by somebody. It's going to cost a lot of money. So trying to kind of drive home that this type of care is actually a maintenance. It's like maintaining your car or something like that, and it's going to keep it around for longer and have it feel that it's been cared for and given the attention that it needs. So I think that's, you know, a good way to kind of, you know, it's kind of like maintaining your house or your car or your cabin or whatever you have. You've got to keep coming back to it. You can't just ignore it. And like when we looked at the lions, I didn't point it out today, but there was a long crack running along the side of the bronze, and they pointed that out to us, the conservators, and said, you have to measure that. Every year you should measure that, photograph it, make sure it's not getting any wider or any longer. And if it is, then you're going to have to probably act on it, because if you don't, the work is eventually going to kind of implode, or it's going to be highly damaged because of the elements getting into that crack. So they definitely pointed out for each work that we looked at, these are things you should be kind of keeping an eye on, and, you know, that sort of thing. So I think if you can point out those distinct details to the public about some particular work, that's going to make them kind of go, oh yeah, you know, you're right, that's something we want to pay attention to, and not just think, oh, it's all looks fine, it's great, no problem, why do we even have to worry about this? So I think that's how I would approach it.
Perfect, thank you. So I just got through all the questions that have been submitted. So I just want to point out that, like, and you had some great like points to take away, which I actually encapsulated in one of the resource sheets that we created. But I know my big takeaways from your lecture are basically to be able to pivot. Like, I think being able to pivot is important in today's world in general, and like relooking at even grant applications or even the actual projects themselves. It's a good way to do that. Pay attention to the weather, both heat and rain, and all the things that can be thrown out in our way, I think is another key point. Do you have any other key points you'd like to pass along to the audience before we close out today's program?
Well, I think when I was looking, as I did this talk, I was kind of developing this talk, I went through and kind of looked at all the work we put into it and all the different things we created and all the photos and everything. And I kind of just realized how many people were involved with this in so many different ways. You know, the students who were working on it with us, facilities getting involved, people in the media locally, both in the school and external. You know, so then you kind of go, it was just neat to see all the relationships that were built out of it, and how much you need all those other people to do their input part as well. It's not just about you, you know. So I think that was a kind of great thing that I pulled out of the project, was that it was very involved with others, and I think it worked out well because we had a good level of good communication, respectful communication, enthusiasm, fun, you know, all these things that kind of were involved in the project, and I think it showed.
Yeah, I think anytime I hear about people with projects that they end up getting, and I know you said you had some hesitation from people walking by to get involved, which I find so funny because I know a lot of my registrar friends, we're all in the same way, that whenever we go to museums, we tend to be the ones who are yelled at for getting too close to the objects. And you have the opposite problem here a little bit, but just hearing about how like you're able, you know, the facilities people were coming up and being like, oh, this is cool, and you know, all that kind of stuff. I think that's a great point to your project. It shows how successful it was in that area of reaching out to other communities that might not have been involved originally.
Yeah,
So kudos
I
to
agree.
you guys for sure. Well, it is 2:00 Eastern, so I'm going to go ahead and close out today's program. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for presenting today. We really appreciate it. Again, links to the survey and resources are in the chat. I will try to get this recording up as quickly as I can. And please join us for our IPM webinar later in August and our Care of Silver in September, and more free programs coming to you from C2C Care. So thank you to FAIC. Thank you to all of the fabulous people who are still supporting our program, and we will see you in a few weeks for IPM. Thanks again.